Welcome back to the Deep Dive. It's great to have you with us again. Today, we are taking, well, a truly monumental leap back in time. Way back, all the way to ancient Greece, to one of the absolute foundational figures of Western thought, Plato. Okay, let's unpack this thinker. Our mission today really is to understand his philosophical world. We want to get into his key ideas and, crucially, why he still feels so relevant, so incredibly relevant, especially when you think about the context he was in. A really wild time. We'll be diving into excerpts, insights from works like Plato, philosophy, ideals, and the state. And I promise you, we're going to find some connections, maybe some unexpected ones, stretching right up to today. Things that might challenge how you think about reality, about knowledge.
It's fascinating, isn't it? What's truly fascinating here is just the sheer breadth, and the enduring impact. It's almost inescapable, Plato's thought. His ideas weren't just groundbreaking for his time. They literally formed the landscape that followed. For centuries, millennia even, they provided the bedrock for so much philosophy, political theory, even theology down the line. And to really grasp Plato, you absolutely have to understand the world he was living in. It was turbulent. And you need to get the philosophical conversations he was joining and frankly transforming. This isn't just dusty old history, not at all. It's the foundation, the very DNA of so much modern thinking, how we think about reality, knowledge, justice, government, even the human soul itself. It traces back.
That's a perfect place to start then. Let's begin right there. The world that shaped this, well, colossal mind. When we talk about Plato, we mean one of the absolute greats of ancient Greek philosophy, a cornerstone of Western thought. His influence, like you said, is practically immeasurable. But what kind of world was it? What kind of environment produces a thinker like that? What was the crucible, that forced these huge questions?
Right. So Plato, he was born around 428 BCE, lived until about 348 BCE, and he really came of age during the twilight of Athens' golden age. That's the key period. On the surface, it was an incredibly vibrant time, culturally, politically dynamic. Athens was the center of the Greek world. Think about the Parthenon being built, the flourishing of Sophocles, Aristophanes, the rise of democratic ideas. Rhetoric was exploding. It was, a time of incredible achievement, real confidence for the city-state. But, and this is crucial, underneath that shiny surface, Athens was dealing with some really deep internal crises. These crises profoundly affected its social fabric. Okay, so after the Persian Wars, Athens got incredibly powerful, formed the Delian League, established this direct democracy, revolutionary stuff for the time. Citizens actually participated directly in making decisions, which sounds great, but it had vulnerabilities, serious ones. And these democratic structures started to show major cracks, especially during and after the Peloponnesian War.
The war with Sparta, that was devastating, wasn't it?
Absolutely devastating. It lasted decades, from 431 to 404 BCE. And it wasn't just a military loss for Athens, though it was that too. It inflicted catastrophic damage across the board. Economically, the city was ruined, its empire gone. Militarily, its forces were decimated. And socially, well, the war ripped society apart. Trust evaporated. Factionalism was rampant. Civic unity under immense strain. Plus, there was the plague early on, killed a huge chunk of the population, including their leader, Pericles.
So just chaos and disillusionment.
Exactly. A profound sense of disorder, maybe even moral decay. It was a tough, tough time to be an Athenian.
And it wasn't just the war and the political mess, right? There was something much more personal, something deeply traumatic that hit Plato hard, changed everything for him.
Precisely. You're talking about Socrates. Plato's youth was fundamentally marked by the condemnation and execution of his mentor, Socrates, in 399 BCE. Socrates was this, unique figure in Athens, always questioning assumptions, pushing for moral clarity, and the Athenian populace, through their democratic court system, accused him of corrupting the youth and impiety, basically, not respecting the city's gods.
Which sounds kind of trumped up, looking back.
It certainly looks that way to many. But for Plato, watching this happen, it wasn't just personal grief, though it was definitely that. His teacher, his inspiration, it was seeing the system, the democracy he grew up in, condemn its wisest citizen. A man dedicated, Plato thought, to truth and virtue, condemned him to death. That trial, that execution, it became a critical turning point. It solidified Plato's doubts about democracy. He saw it turn on itself, eliminate the very person trying to make people think more clearly. So it pushed him into this intense reflection on justice, the ideal state, what wisdom really means. It really fueled his lifelong skepticism of just letting the masses rule without, guidance. And it sparked his search for a better foundation for society, more stable, more rational, more just.
So it wasn't just sadness for his mentor. It was, like you said, a crisis of confidence in the whole democratic experiment he was living through. It directly fed that quest for a better way, for a deeper understanding of truth and justice. Okay, so to really get how revolutionary Plato was, we need to understand the philosophical world before him. What was already there? What was the intellectual air he was breathing when he started out?
Good question. Before Plato really made his mark, Greek philosophy had kind of developed along two main lines, two different focuses. First, you had the nature philosophers, the ones we often call the pre-Socratics. They started popping up around the 6th century BCE. Thinkers like Thales, Anaximander, Heraclitus, their main gig, understanding the physical world. What's it made of? How does it work? Thales, for instance, famously said everything comes from water. That was a huge step, trying natural explanations instead of just myths.
Right, trying to find the basic stuff of the universe.
Exactly. And Anaximander talked about this undefined, boundless source. Heraclitus, he was all about change. Flux, can't step in the same river twice. He thought conflict was key. So philosophy back then was really close to what we'd call natural science today, asking big cosmological questions. What's the fundamental structure? How did it all begin? What's the archa, the first principle? Then the second line, completely different focus, Socrates. Socrates just turned everything inward, away from the cosmos towards the human being. He put the human soul, ethics, virtue, living a good life right at the center.
The unexamined life is not worth living. That's him.
That's him. Pushing people to question their own beliefs, their morals. What is justice? What is courage? Really understand it. He thought the answers were inside us, found through self-examination, but, and this is key, Socrates wrote nothing down. Zero. His teachings, his whole method of questioning, it was all passed on orally, mainly by his students, especially Plato. So Plato becomes the first major philosopher to not only preserve Socrates' ideas, but to massively develop them. He gave them written form, a system. And this leads to Plato's incredible synthesis. He managed to weave together those big cosmological questions of the pre-Socratics, what is ultimate reality, with Socrates' deep dives into ethics and the soul.
Bringing the universe and the individual together.
Exactly. It was a genuine aha moment in thinking. He wasn't just adding stuff. He was building a whole system. He turned philosophy into this comprehensive discipline covering metaphysics, reality, epistemology, knowledge, ethics, morality, politics, even aesthetics, beauty. He built connections, systems, laid the groundwork for how philosophy would operate for, well, basically forever.
That's amazing. Not just tweaking things, but building a whole new framework. And he didn't just summarize. He built this completely new way of seeing reality itself, starting with his theory of forms, or theory of ideas, sometimes called. This is where things get really, well, really Plato. If everything we see and touch is flawed and temporary, what did Plato think true reality actually is? Because it sounds like it's not this world.
You've nailed it. That's the absolute cornerstone of Plato's metaphysics, the theory of forms. For Plato, this world, the one we experience through our senses, sight, touch, hearing, it's just a shadow, an imperfect copy. It's fleeting. Think about it. Everything in this physical world changes. It comes into being, it decays, it disappears, flowers wilt, buildings crumble, people age. Nothing here is permanent or perfect.
Okay, so it's all temporary and flawed.
Right. True reality, for Plato, exists somewhere else entirely. Beyond our senses. This is the world of forms, or the world of ideas, and this world is unchanging, permanent, perfect. In this ideal realm, there are these perfect, eternal blueprints, essences for everything we encounter in the physical world. For every object, every concept, there's a perfect form.
Okay, hold on. Like an ideal chair. What does that even mean? It's hard to picture a perfect chair that doesn't exist physically.
It is hard, and that's the point, almost. Plato is challenging our basic assumptions about reality. Let's use that chair example. Think of all the chairs you know. Wooden, metal, comfy, hard, maybe broken. They're all different, right? Different materials, shapes, states of repair.
Variable, imperfect.
Exactly. Imperfect copies. But you still know they're all chairs. How? Plato says it's because there's a single, perfect, non-physical form of the chair, the ideal chair. This form defines the essence of chairness. It's the perfect standard. It doesn't change, it doesn't break. You can't see or touch this form, but it's what makes all physical chairs recognizable as chairs. They participate in or imitate this perfect form. And this isn't just for objects like chairs, it applies even more importantly to abstract concepts, things like beauty, goodness, justice, truth. Even mathematical ideas like a perfect circle or triangle. There are perfect, unchanging forms for all of these in that ideal realm.
So a beautiful painting or a just act is just a flawed reflection of the real form of beauty or justice.
Precisely. The specific beautiful thing might fade. The just act might be imperfectly carried out. But the form of beauty, the form of justice, those are eternal and perfect. They're the ultimate standards. The physical world is full of particular examples. The world of forms contains the universal essences. Now connect this to the bigger picture, to knowledge. Real knowledge, Plato says, can only be about this world of forms, not the sensory world.
Why not the sensory world? That's what we experience.
Because our senses, as we just said, can fool us. They deal with temporary, changing things. What looks true one moment might be false the next. But the forms, they're universal, eternal, unchanging. So knowledge based on them is also certain and unchanging. True knowledge, episteme, comes from grasping the forms, usually through reason and intellect, not just looking around. This was radical. It turns our everyday understanding upside down. It asks, if what I see isn't fully real, then what is?
Mind-bending stuff. Our reality is just a shadow play. Okay, so if the world we see is just an imitation, how do we actually know anything real? How do we get beyond just believing things, what we think is true, based on these shadows? This gets us right into Plato's big distinction between knowledge and belief, right?
Absolutely. He draws a very sharp line here. He separates belief, the Greek word is doxa, from knowledge episteme. Belief, doxa, is what we get from our senses, from our everyday experience in this physical world. It's temporary, it changes, it's unreliable, it's basically opinion.
Like thinking the sun goes around the earth because it looks that way.
Perfect example. That's doxa. Based on senses, seems plausible, but it's not true knowledge. Or thinking something is beautiful just because it appeals to your senses, without grasping the form of beauty. Doxa is the realm of appearances, of shadows. Knowledge, episteme on the other hand, is permanent. It's certain. It's absolutely true. It doesn't change. And this kind of genuine knowledge, Plato argues, can only be achieved by grasping the world of forms. Since the forms are perfect and eternal, understanding derived from them is also perfect and eternal. So for Plato, the philosopher's job, their highest calling, is to pursue this kind of knowledge. Knowledge of the forms. It's an intellectual journey, almost a spiritual one, moving from the dim cave of belief into the bright light of true knowledge.
And to really hammer this home, to illustrate this journey from illusion to truth, Plato gave us maybe the most famous allegory in all of philosophy, the allegory of the cave. Take us inside. What's happening in there? What does it show us?
Right, the cave allegory. It's in Book 7 of the Republic, and it's just brilliant. So evocative. Okay, imagine this. People chained inside a deep cave since birth. They're chained so they can only look forward at the back wall of the cave. Their necks and legs are fixed. Behind them, there's a big fire burning. And between the fire and these prisoners, there's a raised path. Along this path, people carry objects, statues of animals, people, tools, whatever.
But the prisoners can't see the objects themselves.
Whoa. They only see the shadows of these objects cast by the fire onto the wall in front of them. These flickering shadows are literally all they've ever known. So naturally, they think the shadows are reality. The only reality. They might even give the shadows names, talk about them, become experts on the shadow world. For them, the wall is the world. Now, the process of liberation, this is where philosophy begins. For Plato, it's breaking free from those chains. The chains represent our senses, our assumptions, social conventions, maybe.
The things that limit our perception.
Exactly, and turning around. At first, it's painful. The fire's glare hurts their eyes after a lifetime in dimness. Then, one prisoner is freed, forced out of the cave, up a steep, rough path, into the sunlight outside. Imagine emerging into bright daylight after being in a cave forever, blinding.
Overwhelming.
Totally. But as their eyes adjust, they start to see the real world outside. Real trees, real animals, real people, not just shadows. This ascent out of the cave represents the journey to the world of forms. The things outside are the forms, the true realities. And the sun. The sun outside the cave is the ultimate symbol. It represents the form of the good, the highest form, the source of all truth, reality, and knowledge. Just like the physical sun lets us see things clearly, the form of the good illuminates the world of forms, allowing the mind to grasp true understanding. And this allegory just raises this huge question for us, doesn't it? What about our own perception of reality? Are we maybe trapped in our own caves, mistaking shadows for reality?
Shadows cast by.
What?
Media, culture, our own biases.
Could be any of those. Social media feeds, news cycles, political narratives, unquestioned traditions. Plato challenges us. Are we content with these flickering images? Or are we willing to make that difficult climb? To question, to seek deeper understanding, even if it's uncomfortable. To try and see the sun. And he adds, the philosopher who has seen the sun has a duty to go back down, try to help others see, even if they're mocked or disbelieved.
That's incredibly powerful. It reframes everything about what we think is real and true. But Plato wasn't just about abstract metaphysics. His philosophy was, as you said, intensely practical too. He believed the structure of the human soul actually mirrored the structure of an ideal just state. Okay, let's unpack that. What did Plato think the soul was made of? How does that internal setup connect to society?
Yes, understanding the soul was absolutely key for Plato. Not just for being a good person, but for building a good society. He divided the soul into three main parts, each with its own nature, its own drives. First, at the top, there's reason, logos in Greek. This is our thinking part, our capacity for logic, learning, understanding, seeking wisdom. It's meant to be the guide, the ruler of the soul. Its virtue is wisdom. Second, there's the spirited part, tenos. This isn't just raw emotion, it's more about honor, courage, indignation at injustice, ambition, willpower. Our inner warrior, it can be noble, helps enforce reason's decisions, especially against base desires. Its virtue is courage. And third, at the bottom we have appetite, epithemia. This covers our basic bodily needs and desires, hunger, thirst, sex, desire for money, comfort, our inner consumer. It's necessary, but it can easily get out of control if not managed. Its virtue, when controlled, is temperance or moderation.
So reason, spirit, appetite. Like a little internal society.
Exactly like that. And the ideal person for Plato is someone where these three parts are in harmony, balanced. Crucially, reason must be in charge, guiding the spirited part, managing the appetites, like a charioteer controlling two horses, one noble spirit, one unruly appetite. When reason rules, the individual is just, virtuous, balanced. If appetite takes over, you get someone ruled by base desires. If spirit dominates without reason, maybe reckless ambition or anger. So this inner harmony, this structure where reason leads, is what makes a person just. And this tripartite structure of the soul is the direct model for Plato's ideal state. He saw the state as the individual soul writ large, a macrocosm reflecting the microcosm.
Okay, so if the balanced soul needs reason in charge, how does that play out in the perfect society? The ideal state, this is where the Republic comes in, his most famous political work, right? Laying out this vision.
Precisely. The Republic is where he details this whole political philosophy, and it's deeply tied to everything else. Forms, the soul, knowledge. Based on that three-part soul, Plato says the ideal state must also have three classes. Each class mirrors a part of the soul and has a specific job. At the very top, representing reason, logos, you have the philosopher kings.
The wise rulers.
Wise rulers. These are the individuals who've gone through decades of rigorous training, both intellectual and moral. They've made the ascent from the cave, grasped the forms, especially the form of the good. Because they have true knowledge, understand justice, and aren't motivated by power or wealth, they are the only ones truly fit to govern. Their rule is based on wisdom, for the good of all. Plato even suggested they should live communally, no private property, no families, to avoid corruption and distraction. Total dedication to the state. Next, representing the spirited part, thymos, are the guardians, the warriors, the protectors. Their job is state security defense against external enemies, maintaining internal order. They need to be courageous, disciplined, strong. They're trained physically, militarily, but also educated in philosophy, so their courage is guided by reason, not just aggression. They uphold the laws made by the philosopher kings. Unlike the rulers, Plato thought they too should live communally, without private wealth. Finally, at the base, representing the appetites, epithemia, are the producers. This is everyone else, farmers, craftsmen, merchants, traders, basically the economic engine of the state. Their role is to provide the material goods and services everyone needs: food, shelter, trade. They are allowed private property and wealth, unlike the top two classes, but they're expected to practice moderation and accept the rule of the philosopher kings and the protection of the guardians. Their virtue is temperance. Now, what's fascinating here, and often really challenging for us today, is Plato's view on democracy.
Yeah, he wasn't a fan, was he? Despite living in Athens.
Not at all. He was a fierce critic. Remember, Athenian democracy executed Socrates. He believed letting the general populace, who he thought were mostly ruled by their appetites, epithemia, and swayed by opinions, doxa, and persuasive speakers, rather than by reason and knowledge of the forms hold power, was a recipe for disaster. He saw democracy leading to chaos, instability, mob rule, short-sighted decisions, injustice. His analogy was, you wouldn't let passengers vote on how to navigate a ship in a storm, would you? You want the expert navigator.
So ruling requires expertise, knowledge of the forms.
Exactly. So for Plato, the best government is an aristocracy, but not of birth or wealth. An aristocracy of intellect and virtue, ruled by the philosopher kings. Justice in the state, then, is achieved when each of these three classes does its own job properly, doesn't interfere with the others, and the whole thing is harmoniously guided by reason, by the philosopher kings. That creates stability, order, and true justice for the whole society.
It's quite a vision. a remarkable blueprint, even if it clashes with a lot of modern democratic ideals about participation and equality.
Yeah.
But Plato wasn't just, proposing theories. He was building this entire philosophical structure, this framework that, as we've said, just continues to echo down through the centuries. So what does this all mean for his legacy? Just how deep did his influence run? How do these ideas keep surfacing?
Oh, the impact was just immense. You really can't overstate it. Plato essentially laid the foundations for Western philosophy as a structured discipline. Before him, you had these different strands. After him, philosophy became this comprehensive system, tackling everything from reality to politics. He set the agenda, defined the questions that people would debate for the next 2,000 years, and more.
So he basically created the philosophical playbook.
In many ways, yes. And his works didn't just vanish. They were hugely influential throughout the Middle Ages. Christian theologians like Augustine, later Aquinas, they engaged deeply with Plato. His ideas, especially the world of forms, were adapted. Some saw the forms as God's perfect ideas, the physical world as God's creation, reflecting those ideas. It made Platonism quite compatible with early Christian thought. Then fast forward to the Renaissance. Big rediscovery of classical texts. Plato was huge again, fueling humanist thought, interest in reason, and even into the modern era, his influence is there, sometimes subtly, sometimes overtly, across philosophy, political science, even in how we think about education or art. His theory of forms, especially, just never went away. It's been debated, attacked, defended, reinterpreted for millennia. It forces us to ask those fundamental questions. What's really real? How do we know anything for sure? What's the relationship between the ideal and the physical? You can even see echoes today, maybe, in fields like math or theoretical physics, the search for perfect, unchanging laws or structures that underlie messy reality. Is that a kind of search for forms?
Or even in AI development, trying to capture the form of intelligence.
That's an interesting thought, perhaps, the quest for perfect patterns. And think about his most famous student, Aristotle. Aristotle definitely disagreed with Plato on some key things, like he thought forms existed in physical objects, not in a separate world. But Aristotle's whole systematic approach, his breadth of inquiry, his focus on ethics and politics, you can clearly see Plato's massive influence, even where Aristotle diverges. Just engaging with Plato shaped Aristotle profoundly. The critique itself shows the power of the original ideas. So ultimately, Plato's philosophy was born from his time, a direct response to the crises he saw: political turmoil, the execution of Socrates, the limits of existing thought. But his answers, his systematic way of thinking about knowledge, reality, the soul, society, they offered perspectives that resonated far beyond ancient Athens. They profoundly shaped his own era and every generation that followed, right down to us.
What an incredible journey, a real deep dive into the mind of, well, a true philosophical giant. We've covered Plato's amazing synthesis of those big cosmic questions and the personal ethical ones. We've wrestled with the radical idea of the world of forms. We explored the power of the cave allegory, that journey from shadow to light. And we saw his intricate vision of the soul mirrored in his ideal, if controversial, state. It's so clear he wasn't just an armchair philosopher. He was reacting to crisis, offering this comprehensive blueprint for a better way to live, to govern, based on truth and justice as he saw them. And here's where it gets really interesting, looping back to us. I just invite you, our listener, to think about how these ancient ideas still echo today in our world, swimming in digital information, sometimes struggling to tell real from fake, virtual from actual. Plato's questions about true reality, reliable knowledge, the danger of just accepting shadows. They feel incredibly current, don't they?
They really do. And maybe this raises one last important question for us to think about, something Plato might press us on today. Given his sharp critique of democracy, his strong belief that ruling requires wisdom, requires grasping truth, what responsibilities do we have as citizens now? Especially in this world saturated with information, but maybe lacking in wisdom. How do we, ourselves, distinguish real knowledge from just opinion, from the shadows on the wall? And how do we work towards ensuring our societies are guided, as much as possible, by wisdom, by understanding, by justice, and not by ignorance or emotion or just whoever shouts the loudest? It's a challenge Plato threw down over 2,000 years ago, and it feels, well, profoundly relevant for our own times, for our shared future.
A really powerful thought to leave you with. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Plato's enduring world. We hope it sparks some thinking, some questioning, maybe encourages you to keep digging for knowledge in your own way. Until next time, keep exploring.